Rexdale is an area in the northwest part of Toronto, an area that's known as a hotspot for crime and gang-related activity. Using what they have learned in the United Kingdom, an initiative by the Prince of Wales charity aims to create opportunities for disadvantaged youth in Rexdale. And one of the people spearheading that initiative joins us now. Here's Dame Julia Cleverdon. She is Special Advisor on Responsible Business to the Prince's Charities, and it's so nice to have you here in our studio.
It's lovely to be here.
You get around though, don't you?
Yeah, a bit.
You started the day in?
Mexico.
People they're going to think we're kidding. You did.
No, I did.
You just flew in from Mexico, and boy, are your arms tired.
Yeah.
Let's just find out a bit about this, because you're here to help launch the Prince's Canadian Responsible Business Network. So let's start with that. What is that?
That, I believe, is going to be a great collaboration of businesses working together to tackle some of the key social issues, particularly concerning young people, in some of the communities in Canada where a group of businesses and the Prince's Charities Canada have decided that companies working in collaboration with everybody else could do more.
And their mission is what?
I think their mission is to make a difference. The Prince of Wales is always very, very clear about the importance of practical action on the ground, getting some grass off the mowing machine, making something happen. And I think when he came in May to announce that he was hopeful that a responsible business network would be set up with 4 great companies who'd come in behind the idea, he wanted then for those involved in Canada to decide where those places might be. He asked that one of them should be specifically concerned with Aboriginal young people, and that the others might illustrate different challenges. And I think that's what, as I understand it, having not been involved in the picking, I've done quite a lot of the work with the Prince of Wales in Britain on the same sort of philosophy. So I know a little bit about some of the challenges that that communities face, and that companies seeking to move on from slightly philanthropy and a bit of volunteering and a bit of a lunch and a launch and a logo, and into some long-term sustainable change, some of the challenges that corporates and communities face.
Now, you're obviously anchored in the UK, but this kind of initiative, how wide are the tentacles reaching?
Well, I think we've learnt in the UK, and forgive me if I talk about that because I know that really a bit, I think we learned in the UK the immense importance of senior business leadership really getting involved on the ground in very practical ways, not delegating it to the HR department, but really understanding themselves what the issues are, and then working collectively in partnership with the public sector, the voluntary sector, the charities, the schools very often, to see what together we can do over a period of time. And in Britain, the Prince of Wales has been the president of Business in the Community for nearly 30 years. I had the privilege of being the chief executive for 20 years of that time. And so we've learnt a lot together. I think he's invited and taken something like 7,500 business leaders on his Seeing is Believing program over 25 years or so.
And are you in countries all over the world?
No, Business in the Community is primarily in the UK. The example of developing corporate engagement is certainly now all over the world. Corporates have not had a great press recently for some understandable and not great reasons, and I think all businesses now need to step up to the plate on what their license to operate is and what they can do in practical terms, particularly for the next generation.
That's funny that you say step up to the plate, because that's a baseball expression.
Is it?
And that, well, do they use it in cricket as well? I don't think so.
I'm hopeless at cricket.
That's funny that that someone from the UK uses such an American expression. Step
but
up to the plate.
It is about courage, isn't it? It's very easy to stand back and to hide behind either, office doors, or behind the fact that we've got a very big corporate responsibility program, and I'm sure it's doing great stuff. But actually, too frequently, we find in the UK that doesn't take into account deprived communities under our own noses in London, or in the Prince of Wales has been leading a great piece of work in Burnley, which is a Lancashire mill town. He'd worked some 30 years back in Halifax, not your Halifax,
yours,
Halifax, And he learned a lot then about what we needed to do together. And so about 7 years ago, he said, I want now to get his charities, which he has, as you know, 21, of a variety of different concerns and issues. He wanted them to work collaboratively together, and he wanted them to work with businesses, with the public sector, to make more difference. And the big evaluation has just been done of that.
Let me use another sports expression, a football one this time, and that is moving the yardsticks. Can you actually tell that you've moved the yardsticks and changed people's lives?
Well, let me take Burnley, Lancashire Milltown, 2006, lowest level of start-ups of small businesses anywhere in practically Western Europe. Real issues on deprivation, problems with the educational attainment, everything else. Interestingly, 7 years on, a lot of hard work by many, many people, and it's only 76,000 people in that town, but it was a town which felt very lonely, very beached on the beach, that everybody had forgotten it. It wasn't connected with the connectors, not much pride in the place or the people. Over that 7 years, just been adjudged the most enterprising town in Britain, given tremendous awards, fantastic engagement by the local businesses called the Burnley bondholders, developed with us in getting more corporates to really take a real interest in what was going on in the schools, in the youth unemployment projects, in the drug issues, in the homeless hostels, in the real granular engagement. And I think we can show you there the yardstick's been moved.
Does the Prince of Wales ever get on the phone and call business leaders and say, I need you to do X, Y, and Z?
Yes.
He does do that. And is it difficult, or is it more difficult to turn down a member of the royal family when that kind of ask is in?
Well, I think the interesting thing about the Prince of Wales is that he, having spent 30 years of his life both travelling the world, but really concentrating on what can be done in some of the most deprived communities in Britain. I think when the Prince of Wales convenes a Seeing is Believing group, which would be the way in which he would do it, to come to Halifax or to come to Redcar, the business leaders of the 7,500 who've been through the programme know that the Prince of Wales really knows what he's talking about in these issues. So I think working obviously through his big organisations like the Prince's Trust, who handle 9% of all young people who are not in education, employment and training in Britain, so real scale, or Business Community, which has got 750 of the major businesses in membership, and some of the other smaller charities which he's so passionate about. The Prince's Foundation for Building Communities, concerned with how we build communities. He has had an immense and passionate involvement in what they do, the difference they make, how they could make more difference. So he's always seen the corporate sector as a really important player in community engagement.
Anyone turn him down?
Oh, I couldn't possibly comment, but...
Now that sounds like something someone in the royal family would say. I couldn't possibly comment.
Well, through his work with business and the community, I think the fact that over 20 years, I think I started in 1991 as the chief executive, and by the time I left, we were turning over 25 million, and we got 80% of the top 100 FTSE in membership. So that was inspired by the Prince of Wales, but it was business-led and business-engaging. So it's got to make practical, bottom-line common sense, as well as, anybody being interested in the Prince of Wales being involved in it.
Well, you'd think at the very least it was good PR for the companies involved. I mean, surely they would be interested not just because the Prince asked, and not just because of the track record, but because you are going to get something good out of it, aren't you? Yes,
and I think in general, those business leaders, and I was talking to some of the business people today in Canada about it, who were talking about their visits to one of the communities, and they were saying that they were so surprised and amazed at the energy and drive and skill of the young people that they were talking to. They had thought that they would be passive, not very interested, not very keen, and actually they'd been knocked out by the enthusiasm. And they'd all gone back to their businesses and said, why aren't we recruiting people like this? And there's Scotiabank, who's announced they will take 4 people for 6 months, absolutely at once, in order to test out and develop a model to see how it will work. Others getting going next week, I think, in a community fair, asking young people to come and meet business leaders and business people who want to try and help. So I think it is always about practical action on the ground. It's not about great theory.
This is one of the great questions, though, about this thing, isn't it? Is that just because it works somewhere doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work everywhere, because every place has,
Absolutely.
I mean, there are different realities on the
Absolutely.
ground, and different localities have different, while there are similarities, there are different problems to work with as well. So how do you know that what you're doing in Britain actually will transfer and be successful elsewhere?
Well, I think that this is the really exciting $64,000 question. In Britain, we've learnt an immense amount from the rest of the world. So if you look at something like the Harlem Children's Zone in America, that is an amazing piece of depth charge place work. That's now being transferred by some organisations into the UK. We learned from Canada. I remember the Prince of Wales went to Canada some years back and discovered an amazing organisation called Second Harvest, and came back and said, in Britain, why on earth aren't we doing this? This is absolutely vital, we must get it going.
They feed people.
Exactly.
Yep.
And he set up something called In-Kind Direct, which was the moving of in-kind goods from companies into community need. So I think that what is so exciting about the world at the moment, having just this second come back from a big conference in Mexico yesterday with all sorts of organisations gathered together looking to see what could be done to improve the quality of teachers. Now, whether one was talking to teach for Nepal, or whether one was talking to teach for Sierra Leone, or whether one was talking to teach for Latvia, the challenges were very similar. How particular places were going to tackle those were all place-specific. And that is what I believe will happen in this place strategy, which the Responsible Business Network is going to develop under the Princess Charities Canada. It will be different what the answers are in this bit of Winnipeg to that bit of Halifax or that bit of Toronto. But the experience of companies, which is what I think this is trying to get to, is to say to companies, you can do more in a more strategic, laser beam, granular way if you will collaborate together on some of the really key issues for these young people in these communities, and we will learn together. And the Prince of Wales is the keenest of all to learn from Canada, to share what we've learnt a bit in Britain, and to see what we can do to build a more replicable experience.
Is a disadvantaged young kid in, pick your poor neighborhood in outside London, the same or different essentially from a disadvantaged kid in the northwest part of Toronto?
Oh, I have not talked to enough disadvantaged kids in that particular bit of Toronto, but I suspect that most young people have aspirations and a wish to make something of their lives. And therefore, their educational background, their own family background, the influences on them, the things that they have had to struggle with, the challenges and the difficulties, they may be different. But actually, I suspect young people across the world nowadays need something to do, someone to love and something to look forward to.
So the aspirations are universal, in fact.
I have never in all the work I've done in education found young people who have no aspiration.
I presume at the end of the day, however many years down the road you look, you would love to be able to look back and say, wow, that guy's the chief executive officer of Microsoft and he's one of our kids. Have you got a story like that you can tell yet?
In the UK, through the Prince's Trust, we know that the turnover of the small businesses that have been set up through the Prince's Trust over the last 30 years, the top group of them are turning over about 50 million. Now, those were young people in the wake of the Toxteth riots in the 80s, where we had some really appalling problems in Britain, very, very high levels of youth unemployment, appalling difficulties with some of our young West Indian teenagers who are 5 times more likely to be unemployed than are white. The situation is almost entirely reversed now. Our problem in Britain is white boys who are not achieving at the level that we need to achieve, whereas many of the young Indians and young Pakistanis and young Chinese are doing at incredible rates of achievement in schools. So I think it is about saying that, yes, there are, of course, great examples of those things, but it's not enough. You can always pick out a poster boy and say that's marvellous. You want to get the whole of the boats to rise. And I think what the place strategy is trying to do with the Responsible Business Network, with the Prince's Charities in Canada, is to see, can you get a place and really concentrate with a real strong partnership to see what we can do to help make all young people do better.
What do you think turned it around? Because I think the experience in Canada is very similar insofar as once upon a time it was, quote unquote, other people who had it worse and whites did better. And now, I was about to say suddenly, but maybe not so suddenly, a lot of that is reversed. Why do you suppose? Well,
in Britain, I don't dare suggest anything at all about Canada. That's your strength. I think in Britain we have found immense diverse communities growing in our main cities, and actually we're doing pretty well on it. If you look at the London educational performance of young people between 2007 and 2014, London is now the educational capital of Europe. We are doing immensely well, and we can identify what it is that's happened in those communities to raise the game in schools. Our problem is white boys in more coastal towns, in more regional areas, not in cities, where potentially the education has not been as good, or not as good as we've managed to improve from a pretty low base in London, but we're doing better now. But also a lack of opportunities, jobs, connections. Most of the problem, it always seems to me, in poor communities is that we are dealing with many young people who are not connected to the connected. Those who are connected get jobs. I was in Redcar the other day up in the northeast, talking to young people. They knew nobody who was employed, and none of their parents were employed. And when you are dealing with that sort of intergenerational unemployment, it is very difficult for them to feel much hope or to feel connected to those who will help them bring connections. Now, Redcar's doing an amazing job in bringing business leaders. PD Ports, one of the great companies up there in the northeast, running an incredible program called High Tide, working with all their other companies in that area to get to those young people and to get them into jobs. And that's the sort of experience which I know is already going on in Canada, but this is a particular way of trying to engage businesses who seem to me, the lunchtime meeting I've just had with them, to have immense energy and interest and concern about how you tackle the postcode problems, which is that everybody tends to recruit those that are easiest to get to. They don't go to the places where actually there's plenty of talent, there's plenty of diamonds in the dust in there.
Got to find them.
You just got to get them.
I'm, excuse me, I'm going to beg the control room's indulgence for one more minute, and I'm going to beg your forgiveness in asking this question, but we have seen your boss, if I can put it that way. We've seen him grow up on television over the last many, many decades, and so everybody thinks they know him a little bit. You know him very well. I had the honor of meeting him once. Tell us one misconception we may have about the Prince.
I suppose if you think about princes, you think that they have rather a gilded lily existence, possibly, with quite an easy life. I think the misconception about the Prince is the Prince of Wales, who I've had the honour and pleasure and fascination of working with for 30 years, is one of the hardest working entrepreneurs I think I've ever met. And I know quite a lot of entrepreneurs in my life. He works immensely hard on a variety of causes. He has the most extraordinary ability to connect issues and problems and ideas in an absolute stream of consciousness with much action for everybody. But he's nearly always right, that actually we could be doing more on this. He gave me quite a talking to about what we were doing for the boys that were most in trouble with the police in Burnley. And he didn't think we were doing enough. And I said, what sort of thing do you think we should be doing? So he said, well, you should be getting the army involved. They're frightfully good. He's a great believer in the services. They're really good at taking young people who've lost their way and shaping it up. So I said to the police in Burnley, can you give me the names of 100 naughty boys? And I said to the army, well, Prince said to the army, please could we borrow 10 young army officers? And I said to the police, well, we've got 10 young army officers, perhaps we could have 5 police community support officers. And we sent this group off for 10 days with the Prince's Trust, who are the great experts on this stuff. And when they came back off the programme after 10 days of uphill dale and leadership and all sorts of things, not only had Burnley robbery figures fallen like a stone while they'd all been away, but actually when they came back, 86% of them did not reoffend again, got themselves into jobs. 5 of them got themselves into the army. A group of 15 set themselves up as something called Twister, teenagers working in society to earn respect. Clear that actually, as a result of that very unusual partnership set up by the Prince of Wales like that, he'd really found a solution which none of the rest of us had come up with, which had got the police community support officers braver about talking to naughty boys, had got the army with an eye in on young people who'd lost their way, and had turned many of those young people around. So the Prince of Wales is an immense hard worker and a very lateral thinker and passionate about the communities in Canada, Australia, UK, really, really so anxious to see how this works.
Dame Julia, we thank you very much for spending so much time with us at TVO today and wish you well with your work.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.